Today on All Things 80s, it's the Halloween special. Welcome back to All Things 80s. Now today we'll have a quick chat about Halloween in the 80s. Now the first subject we're going to take a look at are the masks we used to wear. Now this right here is the very mask I had in 1980. Now when I say the very mask, this isn't the actual one I had to get hold of this one quite recently, but it was this very mask that I had in 1980. And as a huge fan of Batman, I was so happy to go about wearing this. Now the following year, 1981, I still had this mask in my closet, and I thought it would be a good idea to cut the mask with a pair of scissors and remove the lower section to reveal my own face to make it more authentic. And of course, being a young kid, I made a complete arse of it, and it ended up being so jagged that I couldn't actually wear it. But all was not lost, because that year, the Halloween edition of Look-In magazine on the back page had an adamant cutout mask. So I think I had my mum carefully cut it out for me and pasted it to the back of a cereal box, put some holes in it, put some string, and I wore the adamant mask to the Christmas party, geez, the Halloween party. And thinking back to the 80s, these masks really were fantastic. I also had Spider-Man and what turned out to be a knockoff Gene Simmons mask, which I really loved, that had the curly hair attached to it. And there were other ones of a similar vein with the sort of fake curly hair that I really enjoyed those masks, and they were pretty cheap as well. Now obviously, going by today's standards, when you see the masks that are for sale, they're so realistic, they're quite gruesome if I'm being honest, but they're expensive. These masks were very cheap, and again, something that was easily purchased with pocket money. So given the choice of today's realistic masks or these, I pick these every day of the week. Now, as with masks, the costumes that we had as kids in the 80s were more or less homemade. You go online today and there's tons of fancy costumes for kids that had a fair penny. But I always remember back in primary school, in the lead up to Halloween, the teacher would ask us all to bring in a black trash bag, and depending on your sex, you would either be a witch or a wizard. And it was a really simple concept of cutting a hole for the head, a couple of holes for your arms, and then you would decorate this trash bag with glitter and other sort of, craft paper and things. It was a lot of fun. And as with the sort of cape we would create for ourselves, we got to make witches or wizard hats, basically from black craft paper, forming it into a cone and making a brim, and again, get out the glue stick, pour on some glitter, and those were our costumes. It was a lot of fun, and certainly I'm sure kids these days just get bought a costume from the store, so they don't have the same experiences that we had in designing and creating our own costumes. So now that we had our mask and our costumes prepared, the school Halloween party was always a big thrill. And at that party, aside from getting little sandwiches and fairy cakes and a glass of juice, we would have a couple of Halloween games. And I'm pretty certain that these games will not be allowed to take place today because of health and safety reasons. The first one was called duking, which I've also seen referred to as bobbing for apples. Basically, there'd be a bucket of water with apples and some nuts floating on the surface. And the object was to put your hands behind your back and using only your mouth, try to retrieve an apple or some nuts. And if you fail to do so within say 5 or 10 seconds, the person behind you would stick your head under the water. So assuming you manage to successfully retrieve an apple or some nuts, the next person would go and they would stick their face into the same bucket of water, so on and so forth. And aside from the potential of drowning your buddies by sticking their head under the water, there was also the chance that there would be half-bitten apples and spit from other people floating around this water. It didn't bother us back then, but as you can imagine, this will not be allowed to take place in this day and age. In a similar vein, the other game we played was the treacle scone, which involved a scone. And when I talk about scone, that's one thing I hate about America, is where they call scones, what do they call them? Scoon? A scone? Scone? It's a fucking scone. Anyway, treacle scone, and this thing would be dripping with treacle, and it would be attached to a string, and then that would be attached to the ceiling, and the teacher would then swing this treacle scone, and you would stand with your hand behind your back and try to take a bite out of it. And of course, what would typically happen would be the scone would come flying past, you'd miss it, but it would smack you in the face, you'd have treacle all over your face, and you'd try and take a bite. And this would go on until the whole class had a turn. So by the end of it, there'd be like hardly anything left, but whatever was left was covered in bite marks, probably other kids' spit, but you would still go ahead and try and take a bite out of it. Looking back, it's pretty disgusting, as with the duking, with all that spit in the water. But those were the 80s, and there was no such thing as health and safety guidelines. And you know what? We had a lot of fun. For me, growing up in Scotland, we didn't have what you would call trick or treat. We called it guising, and by all accounts, that's just a shortened word for disguise. Where, of course, you would put on your costume and you would go to the neighbours' houses. And unlike the American trick or treat, you actually had to earn your reward. So you'd go to your neighbours' houses dressed up, and you would be expected to either sing a song, recite some poetry, or tell a joke, maybe even do a dance. And if the homeowners deemed your performance worthy enough, they would give you some nuts or maybe a few pennies. Seems to me that the American version, Trick or Treat, is basically a game of extortion where you would say to the homeowner, give me candy or I'm going to toilet paper your house. So in terms of it being a more sort of noble crusade, I think guising that I grew up with, far better way of doing things. Now, lastly, the candy we had as kids in the 80s. Now, I'm talking from experience of growing up in Scotland, and it was nothing like it is today. There was very little specialist Halloween candy. The only two things I really remember were Mr. Bones' puzzle candy, which was a fantastic idea. It was like a plastic coffin that you opened the lid, and inside were candy bones that could be connected to make a full skeleton. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And I just thought it was such a great piece, because once you finished the candy, you had this little plastic coffin. God knows what we did with them, but we thought they were cool. And the only other sort of Halloween candy I remember were these white, I think they were called Skull Crushers. It was white chocolate skull, and in the middle was a red strawberry jam, which of course was meant to emulate blood. And when you bit into this skull, all this sort of red gunk would ooze out of it like a scene from a horror movie. Certainly nothing like the amounts of candy we see today. And I guess that also stemmed from the fact that our trick-or-treating or guising didn't involve handing out tons of candy to greedy little kids. So, you know, looking back, the Mr. Bones puzzle candy and the Skull Crushers were like a really specialist item that only came out for Halloween, and that made them a lot more special. So that was the All Things 80s Halloween special. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it brought back some memories for you. So thank you all for watching. A special thanks to the Patreons. Please like, please subscribe. Stay tuned for more videos from All Things 80s, and happy Halloween.